Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hello, it's Zoe, and welcome to the last interview of 2023. We will have one more episode for the year. That's a solo-sode that'll be coming out next week, just before Christmas. And in the meantime, let me tell you about a couple exciting things happening on Planet Human. Now, this might seem tiny in comparison to last week's Planet Human. Last week on Planet Human, we talked about the 5,000-year horizon and going interplanetary as a species. It's a little bit more banal, I should say, this week, but it's still important. On Planet Human, self-checkout is dying. Woohoo! It's about time, I say. Apparently, Walmart has removed its kiosk, its self-checkout kiosks. Why? Because self-checkout sucks. I hate it. I hate going through the self-checkout at Woolies where you have to grab your items, you put them on this tiny little bench, which is too far down. You try and balance it all. Then you have to put your bags out, and then it scolds you because you put your bags in with stuff in it. Then you have to get somebody else to come over and unlock the whole thing. You scan something badly, and then you have to get the assistant to come back over and reprogram. It's just... Given the choice, I always go to the teller who can actually scan my items for me because they do it quickly, efficiently, because they're doing it all day. And I can assist the process by helping bag. Much more pleasant customer service experience. So it's a great example of how automation doesn't always provide the best solutions. So sometimes the human touch is the way forward. So all this hoopla about we're going to automate everything, maybe not. Maybe not. If self-checkout is dying, what else might be rolled back? Central to the question, and this might be relevant to your business, is remember the customer experience. Does this make it better for the end user? If the answer is no, then why do it? Because it'll only come back to bite you in the bum eventually. All right. So that is my soapbox, forgetting about self-checking, and be mindful of automation and how it impacts the people you're trying to supposedly support. Okay, on Planet Zoe at the moment, just winding right down, enjoying the warmer weather and getting ready for the summer and 2024. It's going to be a different kind of year. I've got an event on March the 1st. Go to events. Click my website, zoerouth.com, click on events, and you can join us here in Canberra March 1st. We've got a day of reflection and projection and connection, lots of uns happening, and so that you can come and get your year set up well. Right here in Canberra at a little place called Cuppacomlong, which is actually south of Canberra just a little bit. Beautiful old homestead, view out to the mountains. It's an awesome place to do this big picture thinking, and the start of the year is always a good energizing time for that. All right. So my question for you is, how can we collaborate better? And 2024, as ongoing into the future, collaboration is one of the essential skills to hone for leadership of the future. So how can we do it better? My guest today is Grayson James. He's the former CEO of a multi-campus private school system. He's written a book called Full Contract Performance, The Internal Art of Organizational Collaboration. He's a 6th Dan black belt in Aikido. I have a particular interest in Aikido, as one of my mentors also practiced Aikido, and I use it as a metaphor for having difficult conversations and practicing emotional Aikido, where you disarm your opponent without doing harm to them or you. And you use that principle in Aikido practice as well as in difficult conversations practice. So that is my guest today, Grayson James, and we have a very fulsome conversation about how we bring somatic awareness and practice to our interactions with other humans. So it's a very embodied practice. How do we expand our field of vision, stay out of amygdala hijack so we have full spectrum view of the people around us, and we eliminate, if we can, blind spots. So we go into great detail about how we go about doing this. So it is an awesome an awesome conversation that is full of a great, deep learning. So without further ado, let's get into it. Well, woohoo! All the way from Sonoma County, welcome to the show, Grayson James.
Thanks very much. Good to be with you.
Awesome. I love California. I can't wait to go back there at some stage. I've got an aunt and uncle and cousins who live in San Fran, and I've enjoyed my trips there immensely. And some amazing stuff is coming out of California, including your amazing book, Full Contact Performance, The Internal Art of Organizational Collaboration. Now, when I saw that title, I'm like, ooh, I'm interested in that in a couple of different ways. One is as we discussed before we hit record, the somatic experience of leadership, the embodied experience of leadership, and how you actually apply that into leadership and specifically into collaboration. So, wow, all in one book. Amazing. What are the origins? How did you start to create this book?
Well, I think the genesis was that my approach when I work with leaders and teams is pretty different than most people experience. So inevitably, once we get going, people started asking me, well, how can we learn more about this stuff? And I didn't have a lot to share with them. So I decided at some point, someday I'm going to write the book. And then finally, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started. And I realized once I got into it that it was going to be more helpful than just something that I could refer to my clients. It actually has helped me a lot understand what it is that I'm doing more clearly. So serving a lot of good purposes.
All right. So let's rewind a little bit. How do you work with clients that's different to other leadership development practitioners?
Well, I think one big way is that I'm not just focused on what we do with our head. Often leadership seems like it's a head trip. It's something that we do. And the smart part of us is up here, and we have to say smart things and think smart things. And if we do all that, then good leadership is going to happen. And it's not really how it works. We have this body that we take everywhere we go, and it's not really separate from our thinking and from the words we say and the ways we listen. It's fully integrated. We are our bodies, and our bodies are us. And when we recognize that, it really opens a lot of doors for learning and for cultivating different types of leadership presence. So that right off the bat, I talk about how people are using their attention, which is something that I've learned as a martial artist over the years. And I've been studying and teaching the martial art of Aikido for almost 40 years now. So it's a big part of what I do. So I'll actually have people doing work with their bodies, very light, light to no touch, no martial arts experience required, not strenuous stuff, but just exercises that help bring awareness to different ways that we're moving with ourselves and with our colleagues. And the body is part of that. And the shape of our nervous system, turns out, has a big influence on our leadership.
Whoa. Can you explain that a little bit more? The shape of our nervous system.
Yeah, the shape of our nervous system. By that, I mean the level of, we can call it the tonicity of our nervous system. So muscles, you can have toned muscles or not so well toned muscles, and they perform differently. If they're overly taut and contracted, they're not going to be very effective. A muscle that is already firing and in contraction, you can't really do anything with it. You have to have a muscle that's relaxed but able to fire when you want it to. And that's any good martial artist or athlete or musician, dancer, anybody who uses their body at all really needs that kind of tonicity to perform well. Same with our nervous system. When our nervous system is overly taut, wound up, then it's going to be, we're constantly in a stress mode or arousal mode. And that has certain features that can make it really hard to collaborate well or to lead well. If we're always constantly in arousal mode, we're not going to be very present to what's going on around us. And we're probably not going to be very pleasant to be around either.
How do you mean by that? Not very pleasant to be around?
Well, I don't know about you, but when I am stressed out, I'm not the pleasantest guy to be around. Our vision tends to get tunnel. We tend to get hyper-oriented towards what we're concerned about or anxious about. And a lot of other things kind of fall off the radar. And this is one of the big things that I see when I'm working with executives and teams, helping them to collaborate better. It's helping them to expand their field of vision to start with, and to realize that there's a big world out here. And when we become hyper-focused on what we consider to be the problem, which in a collaborative context often turns out to be that colleague over there or team member who is not with the program or who seems to be uncooperative, all of our creative problem-solving skills go, and our attention goes towards trying to solve that problem, the problem of that person over there, that uncooperative colleague perhaps. And that's hardly ever going to be a productive use of our time and attention. So learning to calm our nervous system so we're not constantly in hyper mode actually is an important way of being more present in a more receptive, open way as a leader. And it makes it a lot easier for us to collaborate too, because we don't have to constantly be trying to fix all the people around us that seem to be the problem. It allows us to relax and realize, oh, wait, I'm part of this problem here as well. So what can I do differently?
Yeah, that's a big step for many people to acknowledge that they are part of the problem. Nobody really wants to say, hey, I might be the issue or part of the issue. Before we go into techniques around this, I want to dive a little bit more into how you describe or experience collaboration. And I think this is a really important conversation because collaboration is different to cooperation, where you're kind of working alongside somebody. Each of you has your own little job to do in service to something greater. Collaboration has got some creative elements to it, I'm guessing. So I'd like to hear how you define and experience collaboration.
For me, I see three main types of conversations in collaboration. The learning conversation is one of those. This is where we expand what we are thinking and how we're thinking together. So we compare data, we share our interpretations. What does this mean to you? What does it mean to me? Let's talk about the differences we see. Let's talk about the commonalities we share. Why is it that the world appears the way it does to you? Let me understand more about that. That starts to, when we have those kind of conversations, we all start to expand what is possible for us. From a good learning conversation, which is really an essential piece often, especially when we're facing tough collaborative challenges, when we're dealing with problems that don't lend themselves just to quick, instant solutions. We often need to learn, and learning together is how we avoid falling into traps caused by our own blind spots. We all have these, we're all blind in our ways. So when we can compare notes together and explore where I might be blind, but you may see things very clearly, that actually turns out to work well for all of us. It leads to better decisions and ultimately better execution. So decisions is part of the second type of conversation that I associate with collaboration. I call it the design conversation. This is where you actually design the future that you're interested in creating together. So it has to do with decisions that we make, declarations that we make about let's do this, not that. These are our priorities, not those. This is what we won't keep doing because we need to be doing more of that. We can include goals, vision, mission, goals, strategies, tactics, plans. All of those are declarations. They're all things that we design. Big distinction here is that often we assume that goals somehow live out there in the world independent of some human being who declared them, who said, this is important. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to build or create or what we want to get rid of. That's all comes from a particular linguistic action called a declaration. And when we realize that we are constantly designing our lives and our futures, including our organizational lives and what we do together when we're trying to make things happen in an organization. So learning conversation is where we expand what we can see and understand. The design conversation is where we actually say, this is what we're going to focus on. This is where we're going to put our resources. Also included in the design conversation is this is how we're going to measure success. So our measures, our metrics are also declared. They're part of what we design whenever we're leaders in an organization. And then the third key type of conversation that goes in collaboration, from my perspective, is where we execute together. And I call this the fulfillment conversation, because it is where we make and fulfill and manage promises to one another. This is something also that's different than many leaders are typically think about. For me, execution is all about promises. And what I mean by promises is it's between human beings. You ask me to do something, and I say, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's make sure I'm really clear about what it is you want. And then maybe we agree, and I say, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm now your promiser. I'm making a promise to you to fulfill what you asked of me. So you're my customer now, and I'm the promisor. And the way I manage my promise has a big impact on you, because you knowing now that I'm going to take care of this over here allows you to commit your resources and attention somewhere else, because you know this is handled. And that is assuming you trust that I'll do it. So trust plays into this also. Trust is really important for a lot of reasons, but not least of which is that it allows us to actually feel confident that we have a promise and that promise is likely to be fulfilled. And if it's not going to be fulfilled, then hopefully you can at least trust that I'm going to manage my promise well. And for instance, let you know at the first hint that something may go off the rails with this promise, that I may not be able to deliver it to you on time or exactly as you were expecting it. So that's all part of the fulfillment conversation. And it sounds, from the way I'm describing the three conversations, like they go in an order. You go from learning to design to fulfillment. And sometimes that happens. But very often in any given meeting, you might cycle through all three of those multiple times. You might realize when we're trying to establish a good promise together that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not really sure that we're aligned on what the conditions of satisfaction are. Let's talk about why this is important to you so I can understand and make sure that's something that I can do. Or we say, yeah, but is this going to work with all the other promises that I'm working on for this group or in this team? So we have the capacity, when we really break things down into discrete promises with promisors and customers, we're able to examine the whole, the range of promises that we're working with to see, are they all aligned? If they all go well, are they going to take us to this future that we've said we want together? So these are the three conversations. That's one way of answering the question, what is collaboration? That's how I think about it. So when
it was very fulsome.
Yeah. It's maybe a longer answer than you were expecting.
Doesn't matter. It's all good.
But it allows me, when collaboration is faltering, I can ask questions like, say, well, I can pretty quickly pinpoint where things may be falling short. Is it in the promises? Are you guys clear on the direction you're going, on what the priorities are, what the goals are? Do you all have a shared understanding of what you need to know and the importance of this data and that way of seeing things that will allow you all to be successful together.
Awesome. So let's talk about the framework through a case study, if you like. One of the pieces of work that I'm working with is a team that is digging into their staff survey results. And it's a large organization, and they have a group of executives who are responsible for different agencies. And the survey has very detailed results across different sectors in the organization. And they want to discuss as an executive what they can do collectively to boost their results. So improve the staff morale, the staff performance, and that kind of thing. And I get a sense that that kind of task or experience can put people on the defensive, especially if their area is not performing really well. And so their nervous system will be heightened going into the meeting. So the idea of a learning conversation can be challenged with that. So how do you go about preparing people to be open and aware? So coming back to your primary principle is like, before you do anything, you need to have your nervous system open and ready. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first sit down, start working with teams or executives, I take quite a bit of time up front to set the context for the conversation. So in this situation, now we're kind of making it up because I don't have the background of the context. So, but we can see where we go here together. And maybe we can collaborate, you and I, on this. One of the things that I'd probably start out by reminding folks is that these conversations can be difficult, that it can be easy to take personally things that may not have been intended personally, and to jump to conclusions without really understanding what the people behind this data you're looking at were really intending. And I would also probably take some time to ask them to reiterate for their own edification and not just mine, why this is so important. What is at stake here that has you want to spend this time going through? First of all, conducting a survey is not a simple thing. It takes a lot of time and resources. And so does going through the results and thinking about it, talking about it, figuring out what it all means, and then committing to do something about it. That's all a big commitment. So why? Why is it that you're doing this? What is the future that you feel is really worth working towards, that this can help you realize? Just sometimes reminding people of that bigger picture can help them relax a little bit. And then I remind them, as I just did, there may be things that we talk about, things that each of you, some of you might say that others of you might take personally or feel could be construed as a personal attack. And if this happens, let's raise that and talk about it together, because doing that is going to allow this conversation to go a lot better. It's almost never the case in my experience. I don't know about yours, Zoe, but in my case, I hardly ever come across people with bad intent. People do stupid things. We all do stupid things. Yeah, we all say things that we wished we hadn't said that don't come out perfectly and that can make us seem like jerks. But behind that, we all want to succeed. We all want to do good at our jobs. We hardly ever really, really want to torpedo our colleagues, no matter how pissed off we might be at them in the moment. So, reminding folks that you all want good things here. You all want this to go well. You all want to be successful. You want each other to be successful because you need each other to be successful. No one of you can be successful without the others. And, just simple things like that is how I'll set context. Then we get into the conversation and we'll, have more comments like that as things start to heat up, which they usually will in this kind of conversation. So that's where, having a neutral facilitator can help, like your role can help keep people kind of on an even keel when things start to tilt a little sideways. How would you do it? I'm curious how you would approach it.
Well, I think the framing is essential, as you say. Getting clear about why we're here, and just actually pointing to the elephant in the room is that chances are people are feeling defensive. Some people might be feeling defensive about their results and might want to put blame on other things. And we're not interested in finding blame. We're looking at finding root causes that we share. And I think the commonalities is important. So this is not about digging out the bad apple and cutting rot. It's more, now I need to another new metaphor. To think about the metaphor that I might say, what garden do we want to cultivate together is probably the frame through that. And I think looking for the common experiences, and I like your idea of sharing perspectives. How do you see these results? What is your experience here? And asking them to focus on what can you learn from each other. And so that they go into that with the intention upfront is to learn and to expand perspective. And the other big thing is like, what do we want at the outcome of this session that we're going to do together in terms of, is it just going to be slinging mud around about why things aren't better than they are, and more about, well, what do we want and how are we going to cultivate that? So basically following a similar framework to you in terms of what do we know together, what do we want to create, and what are we going to commit to doing is the thing that I'd like to get them to move through. So I'm curious, you talk about paying attention the correct way. What does that mean? What is the correct way to pay attention?
Well, I actually don't see there being a correct way to pay attention. There are actually quite a few ways that we can pay attention. There are many ways that we can manage our attention. And one of the ways that typically happens when we get triggered, or when we feel upset, or like we're in the target of somebody else's or some other team's scope, is our attention gets very narrowed. Like I talked about a few minutes ago, when our attention gets very narrowed, the rest of the world recedes and everything kind of becomes this threat. And we don't function well generally. It's good for dealing with very specific problems. We need to deal with this urgent situation. Our nervous system's great at that. But then it often doesn't leave that mode. And when we have collaboration problems, too often, what you were just talking about, we focus on what we think is the bad apple. All of our attention goes to the bad apple. And that just creates more defensiveness. It does not actually allow us to have good learning conversations. It polarizes us. So one of the things that I talk about and have people do is to learn to shift, to notice what they're doing with their attention, first of all. So that, for instance, when I'm starting to fixate on you being my problem, you're the problem with my collaboration, and I realize that that's how I'm using my attention, because that's just one way of using my attention. It's not the only way. I can pull my attention back and I can shift it somewhere else. I might decide I'm going to take it back to my body. I realize my heart's racing. I'm breathing pretty quickly. My jaw is tense. That's telling me that I'm kind of primed for battle here. And that's not going to be a constructive mode for me to be in if I want to learn with you, or if I want you to learn, together with me. So one way we can use our attention is to notice what we're doing with it and bring it back to ourselves when that's the most effective thing to do. There's another thing that I'd like to talk about with attention, and it's what I call going meta. And meta just means going beyond. This was before Facebook went meta.
Yeah, I didn't think you were talking about Facebook.
I'm not talking about Facebook, no. I'm talking about taking our attention outside of whatever little circle we may be focused in on right now, whether it's a particular person or a larger problem, a situation, a challenge. And we do this all the time, actually. We human beings, we go meta. You and I are having a meta conversation about what we do right now. And now I'm talking about our conversation. So I'm going meta even to this podcast conversation we're in. So this is nothing foreign or strange for us humans. We just don't always realize what we're doing. And we don't realize that we can actually use that as a really helpful strategy, especially when collaborations start to get tough. So let me give you an example. A few months ago, I was talking with a client, and we were in a small coaching group that I do, leadership coaching group. And he was talking about a direct report of his. He was trying to set up a live QBR with his staff, his entire team. And it had been quite a while. I'm sorry, a quarterly business review meeting. And so, like a staff meeting that generally meets quarterly. These folks haven't been together in the room in a couple of years because of the pandemic, 2 or 3 years. So it was really important they had everybody there. But this one person kept not committing to the dates that Justin, my client, I'm using a fake name here, was offering. He said, look, we have to be together. We're not going to do this unless we can all be there. And I keep offering these new dates, but this teammate of mine keeps not committing himself. And I'm getting really irritated. And I'm starting to think he's just kind of throwing wrenches in the works here. And I asked what will probably sound like the most obvious, simple-minded question in the world right now. I said, well, Justin, what other reasons might there be besides him just trying to be difficult that could explain what's going on here? And Justin kind of stopped and said, well, I hadn't really thought about that. I just assumed that he was doing this to be difficult. He's, got a lot on his plate, but we all have a lot on our plate, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, maybe you can consider asking him what's going on, having a meta conversation with this colleague of yours. Say, hey, I've noticed that I've now offered 4 or 5 different dates, and each time I talk to you, you're not committing to a date. And I've been pulling my hair out and getting irritated, but I thought maybe instead of just assuming things that I have no idea about, I'll ask you. So are you open to talking about what might be going on here? That's a meta conversation. So I went meta with Justin by asking him to reflect in a different way, to actually ask himself a question he hadn't really been thinking about, like what else may be going on. He just assumed a certain thing. And then in turn, he was having a meta conversation with his report. And when he did this, he got back to me a week later. He said, well, I was embarrassed and I was shocked by what I learned. And what he told us in our next leadership coaching group was, well, his mom is in hospice. This person's mom is in hospice. And she could go at any time. And he was really hesitant to tell the group he didn't want people, treating him deferentially or feeling sorry for him, walking on eggshells around him. So he didn't want to tell Justin. And when Justin heard this, he completely changed his tune. He said, well, I really appreciate you sharing this with me. And I want you to know that for me, priority number 1 is for you to be there for your mom at this time in her life. And if we have to have a meeting without you, we will do whatever we can to make sure you're up to speed. We'll bring you into the loop as soon as we can. Don't worry about it. We'll make this work. So it changed the whole relationship. And it certainly changed, logistically how Justin went about solving the problem of getting his team together. So, it's a really simple example that probably sounds very obvious, but it's surprising how easy it is to not go there when we're feeling a lot of pressure. And that's an example of how our attention, the way we're using our attention, our focus, just narrows down to what we consider to be the most urgent issue. And we lose all of these other possibilities.
I think that's a great example. And it's such an easy one, right? I think it's useful to remind ourselves that the thorn that we've got in our side will grab a lot of our attention. We're speaking about attention, how to pay attention. And so we can feel very angry and frustrated and blamey about the thing that's digging into us and that's causing us so much irritation that all we want to do is yank it out instead of going, right, well, let's go meta. Because it doesn't feel like the most natural thing in the world to go, let's go meta when this thing is like digging into you and you just want it to go away or be angry at it. And I think because there's an energy in that, right? There's an energy in blame. There's an energy in deflection that almost feels empowering. It's a false sense of empowerment. It's actually a powerlessness when we blame other people. But sometimes it feels easier to do that than to go, let's go meta and sit in the learning space. Because that requires you to be open.
It really does, doesn't it? That's right. I'm really glad you said that. It's not always easy to go meta. And you can't always do it. You can't just turn the switch sometimes. You have to let that anger or frustration or irritation kind of ebb a little bit before you can do it. But it is the way that you actually can gain real power. Because as you said, it's a brittle sense of power when we're triggered that way. We think that blame makes us stronger, but it really doesn't. It just weakens all of us.
And you are speaking from the experience of an Aikido master who knows that when we are angry, we tense. It comes back to that first principle, I'm guessing. I'm checking my understanding of when you are angry and frustrated, you're tense and you can't be responsive. So when you let go of that, you were in that primed, responsive state. Have I made the connection correctly?
Yeah, beautifully. Yeah, perfect connection. That's right. And, on the Aikido mat, we practice day in and day out learning how to respond to aggressive moves, to incoming strikes or kicks, what we call attacks, without further fueling the fire. And that requires that we have to actually work with ourselves and our own nervous systems because we are the ones that would be fueling the flames, not them. They're bringing the flames. So we are either going to meet that flame with more fuel by adding our own aggression to it, or we're going to be able to work with ourselves and try and calm our nervous system and have clear, precise, non-aggressive moves that work with the energy of the attacker without either harming them or aggravating the attack any further. And I think it's so applicable to collaboration. It's just a perfect analog.
Yeah, I've been passionately interested in Aikido for years and have used the concept of emotional Aikido in my own work, doing exactly that. The whole philosophy of disarming an opponent without doing harm to them or you, I think is, yes, exactly what we want. And I applied that specifically in difficult conversations. And it applies also in collaboration. I would love to know a tactic that you use in terms of when you're getting a group to come in and to get their nervous systems into that sort of readiness state instead of the amped up state. What is something that the listeners can take away that they could practice?
Well, at the most basic level, let me give you two answers. One is something that not everybody will be able to necessarily do, but it will give a good idea of the principle you and I are talking about right now. We have a move in Aikido called the Tenkan, which is where you turn as somebody comes in with, say, a strike to the face. We first move towards it and then turn off away from it so that we don't get hit. So two things going on there. One is we're actually welcoming by moving towards it. We're not trying to evade it or avoid it or deflect it. We're moving towards the challenge, which is, I think, in and of itself, a profound leadership move to practice, sometimes called leaning in. I don't like using the term leaning in because often when we lean, we lose our balance, and I want to keep my balance. So instead, we move our center towards the challenge, and we turn ourselves away from it without disengaging. So I actually will often have teams do this physical movement. I'll teach it. It takes about a minute to teach. I'll demonstrate it. I'll have them practice it. And then they can do it in pairs. And it's one of the quickest ways. It just brings people together. There's a lot of laughing. They have to learn something new together that none of them are good at. But it really shows that you're moving your body in a way where you're not confronting head on. You're not going, toe to toe with the other person. You're listening. You're staying right there with them. You're not going anywhere, but you're not letting them run all over you, and you're not running all over them. That's just kind of the principle. How do you do that yourself? One of the things that I do in every meeting that I facilitate, and at the beginning of my coaching sessions, I will take a few minutes and we'll do some breathing practices. Sounds really California, I know.
No, I love it.
But it actually is extraordinarily practical, because it is one of the quickest and most surefire ways to chill your nervous system out. 2 to 3 minutes of just simple, easy breathing. I don't get really technical. I will generally say, see if you can have the out breath be a little longer than the in breath without straining. And just notice what happens with your mind, what happens with your thinking, what's going on in your body as you do this. Keep returning your attention to your breath. And, people are just changed after 2 or 3 minutes of this. Whatever they brought into the meeting, getting the kids to school, dealing with a tough customer, whatever it is, this really is kind of a reset for our nervous systems. And it often, in and of itself, can help people be more receptive to difficult conversations.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Now, Grayson, are you ready for the Fast Five?
We'll find out. Let's see.
Number 1, what is the future technology you most want right now?
Oh, yeah, boy. What I want is technology that hasn't yet been invented. It's the kind of technology where when the technology breaks down, it doesn't put us in worse shape than we were before we even had the technology. My wife and I, we travel. My wife just took off for China for a month. And she was spending so much of the last 2 weeks dealing with what kind of tech issues she's going to be dealing with there. And then in the middle of it all, her computer crashed. And it wouldn't have been so bad if she hadn't been so dependent on that computer to start with. So, we have all of these devices and different operating systems. Nothing speaks to each other very well. So when anything goes down, it brings everything down to a screeching halt. And I'm waiting for that magic technology where even if it does go down, we haven't lost everything. We can still recover relatively gracefully. So you let me know if you come across.
No, I don't know that reboot system, but I think it's an important aspect to consider in the resilience of our personal and professional operations is what if this thing goes down? What's the cascade effect? Love it. All right. Number 2, what is the best tip you ever got for leadership?
I'd say there are 2 that go together that kind of form a one. And it's really in line with what we've been talking about. So tip 1 is that the success of a leader is not about what the leader does or doesn't do or knows or doesn't know. It's really about what the people who the leader is leading are doing, how they're showing up. That tells us how effective this leader is. So we could say, I don't like the term followers particularly because we're all leaders and followers in different contexts and at different times. But, you can say that we can really assess a leader's performance by how their people do what they do. And then the analog to that, the corollary is the way to become a better leader is by focusing on yourself as a person and how you show up, your presence, your way of being with people, especially under pressure. That's where, we really show up the clearest, where all the work we've done on ourselves shows up. Do we just lose it in a heartbeat and we're off to the races, freaked out, freaking everyone else around us out? Or are we able to kind of manage our anxiety and stress and stay engaged and present with each other?
Nice. Yep.
So those two go together.
Fantastic. What's number 3? What's one problem at work you'd love to wave a magic wand and have be fixed?
Oh, boy. We do not yet know how to be with people who are very different from us. I include myself in that. I think it is the biggest challenge in today's world because increasingly we find ourselves working alongside people who are really, truly different in a lot of ways. And we just societally don't yet know how to do that. And if I could wave the wand, it would be that we would learn how to be a lot more patient, a lot more curious, a lot more interested, and a lot less sure that our own world is the only legitimate world that we need to be operating in. I think that would really go far.
Love it. Wonderful. Number 4, thumbs up or thumbs down? Who's a leader who's doing something great, or thumbs down for a leader who's not doing so well?
Well, this is going to be very controversial. I'll give you 2. One is Elon Musk. I have no idea if what he's doing with the former Twitter platform is going to work or not, but it's just so fascinating to see. He is just going for it. It's what he does. He just throws himself into things, and I respect that he's just pursuing his vision. Now, I've heard all the stories that you've heard, that we've all heard about what an ass he can be. And I don't know him personally. I've never worked with him, but I like that he goes for it and he thinks big. He thinks really big. And, we've all got our issues. The other person actually is the now former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ardern. I found her to be just so refreshing, such a beautiful, refreshing role model of how to be both intelligent and rigorous, empathic and human, clearly super smart, very capable. And she was clearly somebody who was also listening to herself and her own body and her own needs and capabilities. And she, got out at one could say at the top of her game. Now, I'm not an expert. I don't really know New Zealand politics well. But just from the outside looking in, what I read about her, I was really impressed and inspired by her. I hope she resurfaces in some other leadership role somewhere. I suspect she will, because I think she will. I hope she does.
I think so. Someone who's that committed to service to others can't just hide under a rock. I hope. Fingers crossed. Lovely. Thank you so much. Number 5, what is your favorite leadership book or podcast? Aside from the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast?
Aside from yours. There is a book that I've read a few times now. It's called Taiko. This is not on anybody's leadership book list, I'm sure. But it is a historical biography. It's not really a biography. It's a historical account of a 16th century Japanese leader named Hideyoshi, who's was also referred to as Taiko. And he was a remarkable character that really rose from nothing. He grew up in a peasant, farmer's family, and he was discovered by the up-and-coming warlord or daimyo in that era, Nobunaga. And he started out being the sandal bearer, which is about as low, I think, about as low as you can get on the totem pole. And but he worked his way up to become one of Nobunaga's most trusted retainers. And then when his own ambition got the best of him, Hideyoshi, or Taiko, ascended and took over and became a real unifying force in all of Japan for the first time in hundreds of years. And it was through just extraordinary, he was a deep strategic thinker. he engendered tremendous loyalty. And he was always thinking about what was in it for other people and how could he find produce the benefit for them while also producing collaboration. So he created all sorts of unlikely allies, which was the only way to unite at that point a very disunited Japan. I found the story and the person just to be really interesting, and I've learned more from reading that book than almost any other leadership book I've ever read. It's not even a leadership book. It's basically just a story.
How do you spell Taiko?
Taiko.
Love it. Thank you, Grayson. And that was the Fast Five. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. Now we're coming to the end of the show, and I'd like to know, is there a question I haven't asked that you'd love for me to ask so that you can answer it?
I really like the questions you've asked. They've all been circulating around a general theme, which is, for me, really central to the book that I wrote, which is that leadership and collaborative leadership are really internal arts. They have more to do with how we are managing ourselves, what we're cultivating in ourselves, than what we get other people to do or not do. And that's a big, that's something that people don't really realize. There's so much external focus on leaders and leadership and trying to, take on their habits and be like them, talk like them, speak like them. And it really, all of that external focus takes us away from what I think is most important. We need to have our own personal internal practices that cultivate our nervous system, cultivate ourselves as human beings and as leaders. And if we don't have that, there's usually going to be something missing. There's going to be some way that where people don't really relate to us authentically because we're not really coming from our own true power. To come from our own true power requires that we actually be in touch with ourselves and the things that move us and inspire us and scare us. And to do that, you have to be paying attention to yourself, not just to the world around you.
I love it. Thank you so much, Grayson. I've really appreciated that. I'm going to be studying your book to unpack some of the secrets there to help teams and leaders collaborate better and also to be just better humans. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
My website is fullcontactinstitute.com. And the book is Full Contact Performance, The Internal Art of Organizational Collaboration. It's now available in most booksellers and certainly all online booksellers.
Fantastic. And we'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Thank you so much. This has been extraordinary. I love the work that you're doing. I love that you're bringing this to the mainstream and the practice and art of Aikido as an integral leadership path, I think, is very inspiring. So thank you, Grayson.
Zoe, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate what you're doing.
What a cool conversation that was. I love the idea of bringing so much somatic awareness into leadership practice, particularly as we bump up and interact with other humans in collaboration. We can do it so badly. And I think for me, the key takeaway and tip is to practice breathing. So when we become anchored in our breath, it drops away all the mind games that happen when we go into reactive mode. So deliberate breath practice can help be our anchor and our cut through and our flashlight in the dark to get through all the hurdles that get in our way of collaborating better. So that's my key takeaway. is to practice conscious slowing down the breath. All right, my tip for you, it's a little quote from The Olympus Project, my first novel, in chapter 67. And at the beginning of each chapter, there's a quote from one of the people, or in this case, from the World Designer's Manifesto. And the quote is this: "When we design a world, we design a future. We anticipate a world worth living in. That doesn't happen by accident. We can design an environment that encourages trust and cooperation. The rest is up to the inhabitants." And I love this. We've talked a little bit on the show, on the Planet Human sections, about corporate cities that are being crafted and designed, this ideal utopian human arrangement of activity. And yet you throw the meat sacks into there. It's over to us to make the whole thing work. And I think what I love about Grayson James's conversation is that it's mastery of the meat sack interactions that actually sets us up for success. So coming back to these very primal methodology of managing ourselves and interacting with other humans is a fundamental leadership capability that we need to hone. And it doesn't matter how fantastic your environment or city design is, without that in hand, we will struggle. All right, so coming up next on the show, we have the final episode of the year. It's a solo-sode wrap-up where I go through the highlights of the year, the key books and other shows that have been recommended by guests throughout the year, and a look to the future, what's coming in 2024. What you can do in the meantime, if you haven't signed up to get your free ebook and or free audio book of Terra Blanca Insurrection, which is the prequel to the Gaia series, then you can do so from my site, zoerouth.com. Click on books, click on Bookish. You can sign up to Bookish, which is my monthly e-journal on all things book, including my writings and other recommendations. And that will give you access to the free version, the free ebook version of Terra Blanca Insurrection. Or if you prefer audiobooks, as you're a listener, you can get access to the audio version of Terra Blanca Insurrection. So it's a great model of how to design a city and to be mindful of the human elements. I do hope you enjoy it. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.